Film crack time is upon us with me, Clive Davis, and him,
Nicholas O'Sheacon.
And the idea here is we have a bit of crack about some films that have fallen through the cracks over the years. So we try and target things that are, I suppose, well, we started off, the idea was, the remit was stuff that was not available in modern formats, therefore you couldn't stream it.
Yes, you had to get a wax cylinder, ideally, or something that, could only be beamed directly to your mind from space. Yes.
But I think I think it's gonna kind of naturally and organically maybe slightly morph into slightly less strict no, but on a case-by-case basis. So case in point, we're talking about the 1989 Mexican movie ROJO AMANECER, I think, which means Red Dawn. But we're not going back to Patrick Swayze territory like we did in Skate.
No.
It's not that Red Dawn. And this film, it's not as if it's, well, I think there is a, well, I know there is because we watched it. There is a, apparently a Blu-ray. It didn't look like, it didn't look like a Blu-ray.
It looked like a source from a VHS.
Yes,
to me.
It looked like it might have been slightly upgraded, but I don't think it was high definition in any, but apparently it is, well, it is out on Blu-ray, but whether you'll be able to find a Blu-ray with English-friendly subtitles is the thing. So we did manage to find subtitles floating about, and then we married it together using ancient alchemy known only to a chosen few. But if you are, if you know how to do this kind of thing, then you can also partake of ROJO AMANECER. But it's certainly a film that, let's put it this way, is not widely known of. And whether it should be more known or not is what we're here to talk about.
And I think, for film crack, this movie is great crack. I mean, it's a laugh a minute. I don't know that I have had such deep belly laughs in a long time, particularly the ending. I mean, once the whole family kind of comes together and they meet the wacky upstairs neighbors, it's just anyway.
So
do you want to set us up here, Clive, and explain that the historical?
First, I would like to explain, first of all, how I found out about this film, first of all. And I first found out about it from this book.
Okay.
Alex Cox's film Anarchist by Stephen Paul Davis, which is a book I think you've read as well, right?
I've read, yeah, probably your copy.
Right. This is quite a good, I mean, if you're interested in filmmaker Alex Cox, this is quite an interesting read. But specifically in the section where he talks about Mexican films, he talks about, little scene. I mean, that's not his take on it, but it turns out in retrospect that a lot of the films he talks about are still, not widely regarded or widely seen outside of Mexico, right? And one he talks about is ROJO AMANECER, as directed by Jorge Fons and written by Xavier Robles. And he described it as like, he thought it was brilliant. It was one of the best films that he'd ever seen. And so I'd made a note of it. I've had it banging around my head for years until I actually finally managed to track down a copy. And yes, so it is about, and also a piece of history, again, which is widely known in Mexico, but not much outside, I don't think. And this is the Tlatelolco massacre. Tlatelolco being some area of Mexico City. October 2nd, 1968, on the lead up to, I think, just 10 days before the Mexican Olympics open,
yeah.
right? So apparently there had been months and months and months of student protests against the Mexican government, and they're kind of, well, number one, the the taxes and everything that had led up to hosting the Olympics, and basically, yeah, this kind of very, why, what do we need these Olympics here for, kind of attitude. And yes, and also the subsequent suppression of all sorts of mostly like student protesters and stuff, and it led to this night on October 10th, 1968, where, well, I mean, it's still a little bit, we don't know exact numbers, right?
Yeah.
But basically what seems to have happened was, and this seems to have come out more in recent years, that this is more likely to be the truth, that some sort of special group of snipers up on the roofs overlooking this plaza, yes, opened fire to provoke military forces on the ground, who were basically there for security, to then start shooting protesters and the collateral damage, men, women and children. And yeah, the numbers, I mean, I think the official number was something like, they said, the government even when they actually admitted that anything had happened, was something like 20 people, right?
Yeah.
But it looks more like varying degrees of hundreds of people were killed. The bodies were carted away
in trucks.
Yes, and politically, particularly horrendous as well, I think, was the fact that they brought in these tanks, these little tankettes, these mini tanks, and kind of closed off escape routes. So and then went around gunning people down, and then apparently long into the night, I mean, they would track people down as well, like rats. People were hiding out in nearby buildings. They went round, and they it properly described as a massacre, I think.
Oh yeah.
And so as you'd imagine that this would be a slightly more well-known piece of history, but I guess
world history,
with the Olympics and everything, and I mean, you can go down little rabbit holes about CIA involvement and stuff like that as well. But this is certainly something that it did happen, right? This is not.
Oh yeah.
This is very much something that happened. There's a book I was intending to read for this, but I didn't get around to it. But I will read it anyway, called "A Massacre in Mexico" by Anabel Hernandez, which is apparently supposed to be the definitive text of this event. And so you have this film as well, which apparently was made even 20 years after the fact, was kind of made on the lowdown, right? It was made.
Oh yeah, it would have had to be, because the PRI, who are the ruling party in Mexico, basically from the end of the Mexican Revolution right up until fairly recently, they were basically, well, I mean, it's the party of institutionalized revolution, which is one of the greatest oxymoron names ever, right? They rather famously brooked no kind of criticism, right? And this is just an extreme example. But yeah, when in '89 or whenever this movie was being made, '88, they were definitely still absolutely in power, and in fact would have been involved in suppressing the uprisings down in Chiapas that Subcommandant Marcos and the Zapatistas, right, the EZLN, who were kind of the next wave of kind of but that was more of an indigenous kind of uprising, but very much inspired by the first Mexican Revolution. But yeah, that was still going on, and the army was being sent in to put them down. So it's quite a ballsy move to make a movie like this
Yeah.
when that ruling party is still in power.
And I think they did attempt to have it suppressed as well after it was kind of released, and it took a little while to come out properly, and then apparently it did. But what's interesting to me is it never, and we'll get into maybe what we think of the film, but I'm surprised it never really played widely. I mean, it was in some film festivals. Alex Cox mentions in his book that apparently at one film festival it played, like Ken Loach kind of insisted that it had some kind of award or something, or he would
that would make sense.
Jury, or
Mhm.
So the reason we're setting up all the history anyway, and there'll be spoilers as well, I think, because it's kind of unavoidable to talk about this film without spoilers, and to kind of destroy the way the film plays out and how the tension ratchets up. So go away, watch it, and then come back.
Yes.
But the reason we're setting it up is
I ask you to speak pretty quickly to the documentary before I think I'd like to talk about the movie after you talk.
Okay, all right.
So there is also a documentary which you've seen in its entirety, and I've just seen some pieces of, but I will go back and watch.
This is El Grito, Mexico, 1968, which was a film. I mean, the credited director is this guy called Leobardo Lopez Areche, I think, who was just a student. Basically, this was a bunch of students with 16mm cameras who documented the protests from July until August, and there's a lot of footage of and then when we actually get to the massacre, it's all there's only still photographs and people's recollections of what happened. And this is kind of an interesting, El Grito Mexico 1968 is kind of an interesting, so I sent you the link as well, I think, Nick, to like it's considered like one of the top 100 Mexican films or whatever, in a poll made by Mexican critics. It's on that list, and for me at least, it's one of those interesting examples of it's a truly important document. I mean, I'm not sure when this creeped out. Like, I'm guessing no one actually saw this in 1968.
Right? I wouldn't think so.
So I'm not sure at what point it actually came out. I'm not sure about that, but it's restored, and again, a bit of alchemy is required, because there's a nice copy on YouTube, but there's no subtitles. But if you go looking around, you will find subtitles floating about. So you just have to put the two together, because I don't think there is a commercially available Blu-ray or DVD with the English subtitles, right? So there's no other way around it. But it's interesting in so much, I think it is a very important document, but also it's quite amazingly boring to actually watch. At least it was for me, because it's endlessly being shouted at through megaphones.
Yes,
for like an hour. Jesus,
you are more or less just at the demonstrations.
Yeah, when the thing happens, there's people milling about, and they make a lot of. Again, it's one of those things. In retrospect, it's given weight and import, but really, it's people saying things not necessarily that inspiring that you've heard at a million other protests.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
but we know
it might be interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, but I guess we know that where this is all leading. I guess, right? And so and I do think for watching the movie, for watching ROJO, it definitely helped me to get a clearer sense of maybe some of the events leading up to the massacre, and also what it would have looked like just outside the window, because we'll talk about that when we get to the movie. The movie is very smartly, I think, doesn't necessarily show us much.
No. You never actually look down into the plaza. You only see those reactions.
But I'll tell you one thing that struck me, and I've said I haven't watched it to the end yet, was I really enjoyed the various Phil Oakes style troubadour dudes, playing their protest songs.
Yeah, there's a good one that plays actually over the end credits, which I quite liked. And like I said, the cumulative effect of it is certainly, it's definitely a film that should be archived and watched as well, actually.
Hmm.
But beware, you're not really going to have much fun watching.
Yes. And I think the other thing too that it really gives you that the movie can't give you, even though it tells you directly at some points, like the scale, the number of people involved. But when you see that footage you see the number of kids out on the streets, when you see the number of people at those demonstrations, you get the feeling of like, oh, I can see why the government was scared, right? And then historically, when you place it, which is not in any way to defend their actions, but like, what this is a bit of a missing link for me, because I have a sense of what happened during the Mexican Revolution, and not just entirely from watching spaghetti westerns, but mostly, yes, yeah, but and movies with Marlon Brando playing Zapata.
Not great Mexican thespian Marlon Brando.
Yes, but written by John Steinbeck, that
other Mexican.
Yeah, that other great Mexican. Yeah. And then I have some sense of what was going on, as I said, in the 80s and the 90s with in South Mexico, in Chiapas, right? I read a bunch of books about that, and so I didn't know that there was this middle period. I didn't know that which makes perfect sense when you I did know what happened in Paris in 1968, right? I know what was going on in Japan. I know what's going on in the US. So of course it makes sense that in Mexico you have the same. I mean, I noticed when we were watching, or when I was watching the documentary, that some of the slogans painted on the walls were the very same situationist slogans, to have a little callback there to one of our previous episodes. Yeah, they like, to forbid is forbidden. Like, that's an exact one, right? So there was an international sense of young people wanting to say no to the Vietnam War, no to kind of the various things that were wrong, right?
It was a flashpoint. It was a flashpoint, wasn't it? Across the world.
But the difference is that in France, it wasn't like they were nice about it, but they didn't send in helicopters and tanks and and gun down people to the
Well, this would have been part of as well. I mean, the context for it would have been the wider context of the Mexican Dirty War, right? Which itself also was a larger context of the Dirty War that occurred across
just the Cold War generally, right? I mean, that's just the Cold War, right? But
particularly, I think the death squads and people being disappeared and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's very specific to this.
Yes,
place, I think,
to Latin America, sure, because they were scared shitless of the example of Cuba, right? They were, and then you had Che Guevara kind of go off on his romantic, attempts to foment revolution in various other South American countries, and there was a receptive ear, for good reason, in a lot of those countries to calls for revolution. But it's also the time of the US being convinced that there's this domino set of dominoes about to be knocked over, and so you have I mean, it's funny, for a comic that I've never read but I've always wanted to read is Alan Moore's book that he did all about the Dirty War, right? All about the CIA interventions in Latin America, and it's one of his least known.
Isn't that? I mean, he might have done both, but isn't that one of his novels that he wrote?
I thought it was a graphic novel, and I thought it was, my understanding is that it was, it got him banned from being able to go into the US, and that he had this central metaphor in the book. I've only ever read about it, so I could be entirely wrong, but I had read that he has this kind of metaphor, or the symbol he uses for, because he felt like just throwing numbers of dead at people, at a certain point it becomes numbing. You can't really take it on board. It becomes meaningless. So instead, he worked out this thing about how much blood is in the average human body, and how many bodies it would take to then fill a swimming pool with blood, and then he kind of records each massacre in swimming pools of blood. Right.
And to that point as well, it's interesting that we do discuss, it was covered up. There was much more than just 20 dead, but that actually, if you think about it, I mean, well, isn't that enough?
Sure.
to be gunned down is
for really no good reason.
Right? Yeah.
And they're unarmed. I mean, that's the thing that the documentary, I think, does well, and the piece that I watched, and then also that the film does, is that these really were college kids.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're not guerrillas. They're not Che Guevara. Like that. The movie kind of stresses the fact that like they may idolize Che and that idea, but these are just many of them middle class Mexican university kids who are, pretty ruthlessly murdered.
So to the film then. So yes, the film almost entirely takes, well, it certainly all takes place inside this apartment building, but it also almost
one day, really.
One apartment as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're introduced to a family. You got the grandpa, played by Jorge Figan, who's very good. He's like he's the veteran of the Mexican Revolution, right? Yeah. Which again is a fascinating. I mean that's something I don't know enough about really, but it just seems like calling it the Mexican Revolution doesn't seem to really do it. It seems to be at least a few revolutions going on.
Oh yeah,
at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Very difficult to kind of unpack and unpick exactly the strands, right?
Yes, and it's interesting in that way that like the movies, like, so when I was thinking about Compañeros for some reason while I was watching, like, or after I watched it, I was thinking about Compañeros, right?
That's a great document of
yes, exactly. But what I was thinking, well, hang on, that's made just like a year or two after this happens, right? And I mean, maybe it's just one of the reasons the word compañero is used an awful lot in the movie, like it's what the kids are calling each other, right? And so, but I was thinking about that movie and thinking about like, well, you've got the kind of a lot of those political spaghetti westerns. They have the CIA kind of character, like the white. There's a one in what's the A Bullet for the General, has Lou Castel playing that role, right? They're always kind of there, the white.
Yes. Well, Alex Cox as well, oddly enough, has more recently, there's a Amazon Prime series about this event as well, called An Unknown Enemy, and Alex Cox plays like a bad CIA guy.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. So you kind of have this this feature, but then specifically in Compañeros, it's about this like professor and his young students who are kind of trying to fight a revolution within the revolution, and they're pacifists, and they really want the promise of like land and freedom, to be, and they're basically being oppressed and suppressed by the kind of more crass revolutionaries who are all about enriching themselves, and it ends with a massacre of the students.
For those of you at home playing along with the bingo cards as well, yes, you can now tick off. Nick has mentioned as about the Western.
Yes.
Eddie hasn't phoned me yet, and Nick is yet to mention Lone Wolf and Cub.
No, but that's. I don't know if I'll be able to squeeze that one in, but Thomas Millian anyway. There you go. There's no, because he's in that, and Franco Nero.
If you're playing Film Crack Bingo, or in fact any of the things we do bingo.
But no, I still stand by. It made me realize that those spaghetti westerns, that those movies were more of the time. I didn't necessarily. I always think about them. Oh yeah, they're about the Mexican Revolution, but they weren't really.
Well,
they were really
all those
about
things,
what's going on.
Yeah, of course. Yes, exactly. They were more contemporary. They were in period costume. Right? Yeah. So anyway, you have
Grandpa anyway, and Grandpa's great because he really doesn't cotton to these long-haired kids. Although he's apparently a revolutionary, he seems to be quite a member of the institutionalized revolution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you've got his son, the father of the household, played by Hector Vanilla. And he's.
Oh no, I don't think so. I don't think that's his son. I think that's his son-in-law.
All right. Is that right?
I think the mom is his daughter.
Right. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So the son-in-law, and he seems to be some sort of bureaucrat. He has some
middle management guy.
Yeah, he's got some
at the city.
Yeah, and the mother, played by Mario Rojo, who's also great. In real life, a politician as well, right? Mario Rojo.
She's brilliant. She was an absolute revelation to me. Both her acting and then her character as the movie evolves, it becomes absolutely the central figure in the story, really.
And they have a couple of older sons.
The college age boys.
Yeah, Damien and Bruno Bichir. Is that how you pronounce that? I'm not sure. And then there's also a younger daughter, and there's a son as well.
Yeah, who's more elementary school age.
Yeah. So basically, we're introduced to them kind of arguing around the breakfast table because the two college-age sons have been involved in these protests, and the father clearly has some sort of line on, there's going to be some sort of crackdown soon, so just stay off the street, something's going to happen. He's trying to, and and they argue about things like the length of their hair and listening to the Beatles, and and it couches it quite nicely in a way, I think, in that kind of, well, this could be almost any breakfast table anywhere in the world at any point in time. There are always these kind of intergenerational conflicts. Yeah. And they mentioned as well that the Hector Bonilla character as well, they mentioned, and I couldn't quite pinpoint, he was also involved in some sort of and I was trying to figure out
in the 50s or something, like when he was a student. Yeah,
so I was trying to figure it out. So if his character is, say, at the youngest, let's say 38, but probably more like early 40s, and this is 1968, so he would have been 1925, born in 1925. And let's say he was, whatever this happened was when he was 20. So 1945, I was trying to figure out what conflict or what protest or what was going on in Mexico in 1945. I wasn't quite.
I'm not sure
about. I was trying to.
But again, it's the same. It's the same ruling party all that time. So I think they were always fairly.
Right.
Draconian.
So so basically during the course of the day, so at home is the two younger children, Mario Rojo and Grandpa Jorge Fagan, and slowly over the course of the day, I guess things happen. The electricity gets cut off, and
the phones go out as well.
Stop working, and then eventually at a certain point, and like we say, we don't see this. We only see people looking out the window and their reactions to it. There's gunfire, right? And there's importantly, there's flares that go off, right, from helicopters, which was an important thing.
Yes,
that's how they suspect that was apparently the cue for whoever specifically started this trouble.
And we see the snipers earlier on. We actually see the snipers going up.
Through
the roof, right?
Yes.
I think it's also maybe important to mention that the two boys, obviously they do go out. The two older boys, they've gone out to join the protests, so they're missing for this first half of the movie, really. But also their sister, their teenage kind of like, she looks like she's maybe 15 or something like that. She has also decided against her mother's explicit wishes to go and study in a friend's house, like in another building. So she's gone for a chunk. So that it really is just Granddad and Carlitos, the little boy, and Mom.
Yes. So basically, they're all freaking out because holy shit, a war suddenly erupted in the streets below them. A very not a one-sided
massacre.
And the majority of their children are still out on the streets. And then even when they do return, it's not the end of their worries, right? Because the sons return with an injured comrade in arms and a whole bunch of other
folks.
And they kind of end. I mean, for instance, the mother has some kind of medical background or something, right? And
she's just super mom. She just seems to be. She just seems to be a woman who can just step up, which is something that really comes through actually when you read about the Zapatistas, is the extent to which women in Mexico have had to play those kind of roles, have had to just be able to kind of step into the breach because
who else is going to do it? So then they find themselves in the position when Grandpa comes. He goes out and finds the teenage daughter. They come back, but he's also bought some. I'm not quite sure who they are. If they're police or if they're military or
possibly military.
Yeah, he's bought them back, and now they're in a position of harboring, I guess, criminals, right, through their eyes, and things calm down a little bit, and you think, and then they escalate again, and the father comes home, and you think maybe their troubles are over, and then it ends in even more death. And also you see protesters in the stairwells, right? They've been yanked out of other apartments and they're being beaten up and stuff.
Yes, yeah. And
there's
you know, a couple of guys who look like they're sort of just, you know, either like young professors or possibly like grad students or whatever, you know, the guys who, yeah, are getting beaten half to death. But the movie's very effective. It does, it's like a slow burn, but it continually just ratchets up.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Tension as it goes, and you find yourself getting more and more anxious. I mean, I found I was like, this movie and claustrophobic because it's all set inside this.
It's a good choice. It's a very good choice to do that. I mean, I think for one reason it was a practicality, just because they were shooting it in top secret, and how were you going to film, you know, how are you going to film this massacre without, you know, getting a lot of attention, right? You know, so it's practical, but it's also quite smart. You know, the necessity being the mother of invention, and all that. Yes, and towards the end of the film, it's enough to have a Che Guevara poster on your wall to incriminate you, right? It's and yeah, I don't think we necessarily need specifically say what happens at the very end of the film.
But it's not the laugh riot I made it out to be.
No, I believe young Nick was being facetious. Right, so yes, so I have a few things with this film. So overall, I would say this is a very good film and a very interesting, and waiving anything else aside, the fact that this film was actually made to address this thing that happened.
A trauma that clearly the country wasn't allowed to process, because we see, as it's happening in real time, the news is reporting a totally different version of reality.
So in that way, I think it is a very important film, and it is a film that should be more widely seen. However, I do have a few problems with it. The use of music is a bit sentimental. Overly sentimental here.
I only noticed,
even though it was one sparingly, but it's
okay. Yeah, I only noticed there was one part where it pushed me out, and it was, funnily enough, it was a scene quite near the end when they're sort of showing the up or the sun setting. It was a kind of, they're showing the buildings, and it was just that it was so synthy sounding and so 80s sounding that it pushed me right up, because I was like, oh, because and otherwise there's a really strong kind of level of like 60s verisimilitude going on in the movie. Like it really feels like. And then I was like, oh, that music is really jarringly 80s.
Right. So I
didn't notice it as much as you did, in terms of the kind of that it was trying to pull on my heartstrings.
Yeah, I had a slight problem with that. And then also the ending, the kind of, we're suddenly in a Sam Peckinpah movie ending. I found more reductive than I found it. Like it got to a certain point, and then it went for, like, the rest of it is very, very authentic. I think it feels authentic, and even though even the kind of the you know, the sniper groups and they're menacing, but they never quite flip over into mustache twirling villainry. They kind of believably, you can see that they think they're doing the right thing in a way. So then when when this kind of very sudden kind of
you know what, I'll tell you,
happens inside the, I was like, oh, why did you have to do that? Like
where it pushed me out, and it pushed me into was, do you remember the very heavy-handed scene in Dawn of the Dead, where quite near the beginning, where Wooly goes mad in the tenement house, you know, and starts executing, you know, that like they're like, it was basically the SWAT team part of Dawn of the Dead.
Team, right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was suddenly there.
Okay.
I think to like in something to do with even the special effects themselves, it just, a more effective ending would have been almost a cut to black and have that happen, have the sounds of what was going on, but not the images or something, or you know what I mean, or just like,
Yeah.
or even a
Well,
title.
it wasn't just the way it was portrayed. I think it was the like, I can kind of see it. I mean, obviously this is not a documentary, this is a film, and you could argue that, you know, this final scene is just like a kind of, you know, it's clearly, I don't think this was ever documented, right? I don't think this specifically happened, but you could argue that they're using it for effect, and like, well, a condensation of, you know, like, essentially this is what was happening. That innocent people were being shot at. But so, and I know it's not, and you shouldn't, but it just, because everything else seemed, this ending just seemed a little bit,
I know, I don't disagree,
a step too far.
It was laid on with a trowel, whereas up until then it had been very effectively subtle in a lot of ways. You know, and then suddenly it was very OTT, you know, in those last few moments.
Yes, but then again, I can see maybe how some people might argue the point that it's, well, no, it's adding like a little exclamation point, just, you know, just to remind you, just to the kind of level of, okay, this might not have happened, but this kind of did happen on the page below, you know. So I can see someone arguing for it, and also, you know, just as an exclamation point at the end of this film, and to really crystallize everything that's happened. But just personally, I was slightly disappointed by those final 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, I think it could have been. I mean, I think you could have done the same thing, but I think maybe there was another way of.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Hang on, I'm just leaving the cat out.
All right.
It's certainly a very interesting film, and like I said, a very important film as well, I think. But I do have reservations, and it's not quite the classic that Alex Cox wrote that it was.
I do think that all the actors do a creditable job, and I think the mother particularly is fantastic. And there was a lot of just little nice touches, like there's a point quite near the end of the movie where we suddenly realize that none of the student, you know, protesters actually know each other's names even, you know. That, you know, they've been in this room together at that point for hours, and they've been but they have literally just been all scooped off the street, and you blindly run into this, into the apartment owned by the parents of the two older boys. But yeah, there was like lots of just, you know, I mean, there was you know, the other things that were pretty, again, maybe heavy-handed, but like the you know, the bullet hole in the picture of like doe-eyed Jesus on the wall, you know, like, which was
yes.
But and then other little things were really, really nicely done, though. Like, for example, like there's that earlier on in the movie, the youngest boy, Carlitos, is clearly kind of enamored of the military and enamored of his grandfather's service in the revolution, right? And then we see him setting out all these little soldiers in, you know, in that kind of you know, balcony space, you know, and then by the end of the movie, you know, he's seen another side to soldiers follow orders, and sometimes those orders aren't always.
I think that's what even though in some ways it overplays at times, like you say, in other words, there are nice sessions, and overall as well, I mean, there were so many opportunities where, you know, either the mother or the grandfather family could have vocalized, you know, something, and they didn't. It's all done by just their reactions and looks, and they, you know, they never came right out and said, you know, oh, you're just as bad, you know. It would, so that's why I'm kind of surprised in a way that the ending is just that it went there, because so it's a but overall I would say it's definitely, I think I was just set up for expecting a total master. I think if I'd have come across this film without knowing anything about it at all, then I think it would have had a greater effect on me, because number one, just because it would have worked in and of itself, but then also it would have sent me off to look and research about this Tlatelolco massacre, right?
Mhm.
And I think because I was coming out from the other end, then it was slightly less effective. So no, it's it, it should be more widely available. It shouldn't be on Film Crack Crack.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it should be a movie that, and you know, and again, and it shouldn't be a piece of history that is basically
Right.
unknown by people outside of Mexico.
Yeah.
You know, this should be, you
like
know,
all the best films we're going to talk about in this YouTube series, they shouldn't be in this YouTube series.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, that's all I have to say about it. Anyway, how about you? Any final words?
No, I think I'm good. Hugo Stiglitz is not in this movie. I think that bears, when you talk about any Mexican movie, it always bears pointing out to people.
Do you want to quickly just shout Lone Wolf and Cub just so that people can get their bingo cards done?
No, I don't think so. I think we should save it for the, you know, the comics show.
Okay, all right. Okay, until next time then.
Take care, everyone.